Hey guys, it's Libby, and today I'm doing my May wrap-up. Now you may remember last month I read like 13 books, which is pretty impressive. This month I have read 2, but on the other hand, I did not get debilitatingly sick, so I guess we'll call it a wash. The first book I finished was a strange one. It took me I had some sort of stopping and starting about whether or not I was going to read it. It is The Teleportation Accident by Ned Beauman. This story is set in the late 1920s and early 1930s in first Berlin and then in Los Angeles. And our hero is a guy named Egon Loser, which is spelled the German way, and it does not mean loser in German, but you know. He's part of this sort of new modern art aesthetic thing that was going on in Berlin, and he's a set designer, and he's sort of fascinated with this Italian Renaissance set designer named Lavicini, who supposedly invented something called the teleportation device, which was a set piece which was supposed to make an actor sort of appear in multiple places on a stage very quickly. And the first performance that it was supposed to be used, the theater collapsed and Lavicini appears to have died. So Egon is trying to create his own teleportation device, which will hopefully not kill anybody. And it's also about how he tries really, really hard to get laid. I would probably not recommend this book to anybody. Having started it, I was sort of able to get myself into it. And actually the experience I had reading this was kind of similar to the experience I have reading Charles Dickens, of all people. So with Dickens, he got paid by the word, and you can tell. And sometimes, for most of the book, of his books, I'll just read and I'll be like, oh God, why are you talking so much? Get to the point. But then sometimes, if I concentrate very hard, it's like the veil will lift and I will see the genius and I'll be like, this is amazing. With The Teleportation Accident, the same thing was happening, not with how long the sentences were, but with how awful the people are. All of the characters are just terrible people, and sometimes, once I thought I found a guy and I was like, oh, he's not a terrible person, he seems like a nice guy, but he is actually the worst of them all. Egon is trying desperately to get this one girl to have sex with him. In fact, he goes to Los Angeles because he hears that she is there, and so he's basically like stalking her for, 6 years. Once he asked this guy who he thought was gay to sort of look out for the girl to make sure that like nobody else tries to have sex with her. It turns out that the gay guy was actually bisexual and stole her right out from underneath Egon's nose. Egon spends a little bit of time in Paris where he meets a really just shameless con man. When we go to Los Angeles, there's all these just really fake people in all sorts of spheres, and it really makes you hate humanity. Sometimes it manages to be insightful, I guess, and sometimes it does manage to be funny, but in a sort of sad, pathetic, laughing at them, not laughing with them way. If you are willing to spend some time embracing your misanthropy, go ahead and read The Teleportation Accident. Otherwise, it's fine to skip it. I gave it 3 stars. The other book I read was not quite so miserable, although there are plenty of awful characters. This is The Ladies of Grace Adieu by Susanna Clarke. This is a collection of short stories, which is the sort of companion to Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. Now, companion short story collections can sort of go in different directions. Some of them are like a series of epilogues and midquels. This one is not really fleshing out the characters, it's fleshing out the universe. So we see a little bit of Jonathan and Arabella Strange. We see the Duke of Wellington in one story, and of course we see some John Usglass. But most of these are taking place before the events of Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, and it's pretty much just about interactions between humans and fairies. And as rarely happens in short story collections, pretty much all of these are good. I'd rate them 4 stars, just maybe sort of varying shades of 4 stars. My 2 favorites were Antics and Frets, which is a quite short one about Mary Queen of Scots trying to hex Queen Elizabeth, basically, when she's being held in captivity. And I also quite liked Mr. Simonelli, or the Fairy Widower. And the Fairy Widower in that story is John Hollyshoes, who you may remember from being mentioned in Jonathan Strange. This is actually slightly out of order for me because I am reading just my books alphabetically by author. And I skipped ahead a little bit because I finally got around to watching the mini-series of the Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, and it was really, really good. It's a big book, and I was like, they're gonna change things and mess it up, but they didn't. So I was watching this series with my mom, because I go over to visit my parents once a week, and so I was only able to watch 2 episodes a week, and I was like, oh god, I almost started reading Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell again, which is like a 900-page book and would have been a very bad idea, because the first time I read it, it took me a year to read it. I was like, no, you have this. You can experience English magic in a much more bite-sized form. So that's why I read this, and I'm glad that I did. And now, haven't done this in a while, but I'm going to do a bit of a TBR. So for the first couple weeks of June, I'm going to be traveling in the mother country of England. I'm going with my mom, and we're going to be spending some time in London and some time in Bath, but the real sort of focus of the trip is that we're doing this walking tour around Dorset, and we're doing this because my mom really doesn't like Thomas Hardy, and I think if I just take her to the land that Hardy is talking about, that I can get her to like it. So she read Jude the Obscure, which is like the book that was so miserable that people made Hardy stop writing novels. So she read that in college, and it made her quite depressed. I'd rather put her off Hardy. Then a friend of hers recommended the opposite end of the spectrum, Hardy's first novel, which is quite sort of peppy and silly, Under the Greenwood Tree, and she didn't really like that either, and so I'm hoping we can meet in the middle, and we are going to listen to the audiobook of The Return of the Native while we are walking about Egdon Heath, perhaps. So you may not hear anything from me in the first couple weeks of June, but I will make a video of footage I take while I'm on my vacation. So I will see you guys in a bit, not immediately. Have fun.